Hey guys, it's Alex from 7th Hour Films. We're doing something a bit different today. I said that I would be reacting to the first episode of Doctor Who Classic in between the Christmas special and the first episode of Series 3, which I haven't recorded yet. This is in the past. Whatever. Anyway, you may notice something a bit different today. There is another bearded gentleman here with me. This is my dad. Dad, how do you know Doctor Who?
Well, most of you probably know that Doctor Who premiered back in 1963. As it happens, I was living in England in a little town called Herringswell in East Anglia. It's about 75 miles north of London. My dad was in the Air Force and he was stationed at Lakenheath Air Force Base. I guess the background that I need to tell you is, again, as you probably know, the day before Doctor Who premiered, on November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed in Dallas, Texas. We got that information about 7 o'clock on Friday night in England because of the time zone difference.
Yeah.
We were actually out that dinner. We were having a Friday family dinner night out at the Non-Commissioned Officers Club. So we finished our dinner and we went home and began watching literally the nonstop coverage. So it was a very depressing Friday night, early Saturday morning, and strangely enough, Saturday afternoon, there was a break in the programming, the feed coming from the United States, and this very unusual little black and white science fiction thing came on, and I was in 7th grade at the time, and I love science fiction, H.G. Wells. I'd read a lot of H.G. Wells and seen the movies. So I decided to watch this strange thing called Doctor Who. I then continued watching it for the next 3 years. While we were stationed there, we returned to the United States in 1966. So the only Doctor that I had ever known was William Hartnell, the original. Later on in college, in the early 70s, I found out that it was being broadcast here in the United States again. By that time, they were up to the 4th Doctor, so I watched a few episodes with Tom Baker. And then, again, on and off because of college and jobs and moving around. I didn't catch it again until we got to David Tennant, and then who followed?
Matt Smith followed David Tennant.
So I watched a few of the David Tennant and Matt Smith, and then, again, from that point on, I haven't really kept up with it, but I have kind of been interested in Alex's fascination with Doctor Who from there. So,
All right. Well, that's interesting that they took a break, just one break, in the middle of all this JFK coverage for Doctor Who. That is interesting.
That's the way I remember it. Now, there may have been other things that came on. I do remember that weekend we finished watching. I mean, we saw the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald by Jack Ruby, and then of course, that Monday we followed all of the funeral procession and everything there. So there may have been other things on that weekend, but other than that, the only thing I remember from that weekend is the premiere of Doctor Who.
Now, granted, your memory could be a little shoddy. That was a long time ago.
Yes, it's true. Again, I was probably about 11, 12 years old, again, 7th grade, in an American junior high school in England. So,
All right. Well, so we're going to watch the first episode of Classic Doctor Who. This is normally where I would say no spoilers, but this is such an oddity, and yeah, I always say no spoilers for new Doctor Who because I don't want to be spoiled on it, but this, I always say that Classic Who spoilers can be very, very vague, so just don't give away the Doctor explodes or something. That's pretty much that. So, yeah, let's just get right into this episode. All 4 of them. An Unearthly Child, Part 1. Here we go. It's interesting to hear the original theme.
yeah.
Oh, and it's over already. Man, that theme song just won't quit.
I never knew that it was blue.
Yeah, I guess if it was in black and white, then... I was about to say, it looks weird that it's not blue.
And she said that would be absolutely impossible as her grandfather didn't like strangers.
He's a doctor, isn't he? So they have a lame excuse.
Well, I didn't pursue the point with them recently, and this nothing in the middle is number 76 Totter's Lane.
It's a bit of a mystery. Well, there must be a simple answer somewhere.
Well, what?
Could just live outside.
Lovely.
I don't see why they're being so judgmental.
Nobody lives outside in England, trust me.
Oh, that's a
What
good
you going
point.
to do? Be right. All right.
In 3 years, the warmest it ever got was about 81 degrees.
Oh, that must be nice.
Drive there.
It is interesting to watch because this just seems like a place the Doctor would go to now.
Then I could turn it over by itself and we could get on to something else.
It's interesting that she goes back in time with the Doctor,
She means it.
yet she still keeps up with school. I mean, somewhat. Her grades aren't that great,
To the
but...
point where I deliberately want to trip her up.
That's kind of like with Back to the Future, when he says, I'm out of time, and they realize all I have to do is go back 10 minutes before I left.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Well, in New Doctor Who, the TARDIS is not that great about getting dates right. I think I can just faintly hear the noise of the TARDIS in the background.
We heard a young girl's voice call out to you.
Sure, he must be very acute, Hud. Do you hear anything?
It came from in here.
From that
I certainly did not imagine it.
It's interesting, I can still see, like, Eccleston and Tennant's performances in them.
I don't think so. Your head.
I thought it'd be vastly different.
Susan and I are cut off from our own planet,
Without friends or protection. And one day, we shall get back.
Remember, the space age was also in its infancy in 1963.
Yeah.
It's true.
It's also interesting to hear him say that he'll get back to his home planet. Since where I'm watching, he's the last of the Time Lords now.
I was born in another time, another world.
Now look here, Susan, you... Oh, come on, Barbara. Let's get out of here.
No, you can't get out.
I wonder what time period she was born in.
Your arrogance is nearly as great as your ignorance.
Open the door. Open the door. Will you help us? I'll have to risk it
The
myself.
Doctor is just like always cocky. Like that's one constant about him.
The old Star Trek roll around.
Yeah. Shake the camera, roll around, it'll work.
Even you have to understand, these special effects were pretty good for a television show in the early 60s.
Yeah.
Stanley Kubrick would use a lot of this stuff from 2001.
Yeah. Well, and it's also interesting that these are technically a bit more complicated. Because in New Doctor Who, when the TARDIS leaves, it just sort of disappears and then reappears somewhere else. Like here, we're going through a whole trippy vortex scene and seeing their faces and everything.
And that's not a matte shot. They actually had to put the call box in a very large soundstage.
Alright, that's the first part. Whew. That went by fast.
I may have read this somewhere, but I don't think this started like on a half hour or an hour. It started like at 5:15 local time. Because it was sandwiched between two other things, like a sports show and like an evening dance show or something. Like American Bandstand, but the British version.
That's interesting.
So that everyone would bow to you as they did to him.
You never see the inner workings of a caveman
Tell me what
society.
my father did to make fire.
It's also interesting that there's just like furniture and sculptures in the TARDIS. You don't see that on New Who. It just looks like a straight-up spaceship.
Stupid police box. Why hasn't it changed? Dear, dear. How very disturbing.
Disguising itself wherever it goes. Yes, that's right. But how happened this time?
I mean, the show only has so much budget. We can't keep changing the time machine. You know, I don't think the Doctor's ever been captured in new Doctor Who. I never thought he'd be captured by cavemen.
Well, you smack him over the head with a club.
This is a strange
I
creature.
guess.
He's,
He has been subdued
son of a
before.
fire-maker, afraid of an old man. You will rub your hands together and hold them to the dry
Looks like Will
sticks and
Ferrell.
ask all to set you fire. Cal has been with us too long. It's time he died. I say there is truth in both of you. Sal speaks truth, but fire
Yeah,
cannot
people
live
said
in
some of
me.
these episodes were slow, but
And Cal speaks the truth.
how long can we argue about fire?
Will my father listen to a woman?
And he will tell me the secret. I can make fire for you. Difficult. And I'll make all the fire you want. You don't have to be afraid of me.
Oh heavens, we all speak English.
How can an old man?
Well, that is funny. They do explain later that the TARDIS can get in your head and translate everything.
He makes it for me. Take him to the cave of skulls.
The irony, of course, that most of those tools and weapons are probably made of flint.
That is funny. It's also nice to know that the companions were completely ineffectual at saving the Doctor.
They all died when orb left the sky and the great cold was on the ground.
When the orb left the sky and the great cold came,
Not to you.
the Ice Age.
Just as
Ah.
you will give me her. If it's split up,
Boy, these are just passing by.
By the way, the only other interesting connection that I have is in either 1980 or 1981. I was working with a theater company, and there was an artist who came in with a one-man show based on the life of Groucho Marx. The actor's name was John Bay, and I got to know him. Funny guy. Really enjoyed working with him. And it turns out, years later, I found out that John Bay had been in season 2 of Doctor Who in the serial called The Crusade. He played the Earl of Leicester and was very much like you just saw there, convinced that the Doctor was some kind of demon and was going to have him executed.
Yeah. Interesting. Whew. I never thought I'd see so many politics within cavemen. And plus, we're lucky enough to hear them all in English, but if the TARDIS wasn't there translating for us, it'd just be, ugh.
Yeah. And as you know, having studied history, most of what we would consider cavemen really probably didn't have more than about 50 words in their vocabulary.
Yeah.
You know, they had no real developed language that we would have understood.
Yeah. Alright. Part 3.
Shiny black rock.
You just take that, and then that, problem solved.
don't just lie there criticizing us. Do something. Help us all to get out of here. No.
I was gonna say it's weird to see the Doctor not even try to get out of this situation, but maybe that's his plan, is he's trying to get them to figure things out for themselves. I wonder why they ran into the forest and not just back to the TARDIS.
Yes, I think so.
I wonder how old the Doctor is at this point.
I think, oddly enough, that William Hartnell was actually only in his maybe late 50s or early 60s.
Huh.
So he would be younger than I am.
Well, you look better than he does.
Thank you. My understanding was he was not in good health from the
Yeah.
entire time that they were filming. That's why they did the whole regeneration thing.
Right.
Go this way.
The foliage is not exactly what you'd expect in a very cold climate. It's like tropical fronds.
Yeah. Of course, if this is around the Ice Age, how many animals are out and about right now?
They followed us. Quick over there.
It'll be interesting to see if they do a beast. They have the budget for that?
I will be honest with you, my favorite extraterrestrial types, I think was in the 3rd season. They did the whole thing where they landed on a planet full of giant insects called the Menoptera. They're like giant moths, people in moth suits. And there were ants and silverfish and like cockroaches.
I think so.
He looks alright.
They must have buried his ex-head in the element.
Old woman is in the King of Skulls.
You know, for being in the Ice Age, really exposed the chest a lot. Man, they caught up quickly.
Not lugging a half-dead caveman.
That's true. Yeah, okay, I get they weren't lugging around a half-dead caveman, but they had time to not only get ahead of them, but that all hide and get into positions, knowing where they were going to go back to the TARDIS. After like 10 minutes of arguing with each other.
The whole tribe can collect more fruit than one. The whole tribe can kill a beast where one of the tribe die.
You might remember I used to teach this in world history class, the beginning of government, and I always quoted Mr. Spock, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one.
Yeah. You know, it's also interesting that this whole thing could be solved if the Doctor had the sonic screwdriver. Because he could just turn it on and boom, there's a fire. But I don't think that comes up until the 2nd Doctor.
Yeah, I don't remember it.
You wait here.
I think it was eventually written out of the show because it was too much of a plot convenience.
Rather surprised they're using the friction method rather than the flint.
Yeah.
With all that smoke, how do they not smell it?
Yeah. Even if they don't know what smoke smells like, that's a distinctive smell. They would. Oh, maybe they do. You know, it's interesting. This is more fighting than I've seen in Game of Thrones in all the episodes I've seen.
Cal is dead. I give you fire. I am leader.
Man, these cavemen just go for anything.
There is no better place on the other side of the mountains. Do not try to leave here.
I mean, wasn't there a hole to get out of the Cave of Skulls?
Yes. Must have put a guard on it.
Maybe. I mean, they got fire now. They could probably take him.
So the Doctor just ran over her?
Maybe. Ooh, we actually get to see it disappear this time. Well, I don't think that's the 60s.
I don't think we're in Kansas anymore.
No, helpless at all.
I wonder if they're just leading straight into the next story.
Danger, Robinson.
Alrighty. Whew. And that is all 4 parts of An Unearthly Child.
Serial number 1.
Serial number 1. Now it's interesting. I read that initially Doctor Who was conceived as like an educational show.
Yes.
like going back in time and all that stuff. And initially they said they didn't want any huge bug-eyed monsters. The funny thing about that is I know that the next serial is the Daleks. So that's just strange that we go from an educational show, because that was pretty good, and it's certainly nothing that they've done in New Doctor Who, and even when they go to the past, something to do with aliens. But
Again, a lot of it just had to do with the budget.
yeah,
The fact that this was a extremely low budget thing. Just a few years later, in I want to say either 67 or 68, there was an American television program called The Time Tunnel, which had obviously much more of a budget, and they did things like the two guys who were the explorers went back in time, and they were like they landed on the Titanic, and they tried to convince the captain that there was an iceberg
Yeah.
and could do that. So again, for the extreme low budget that they had, they did pretty well. You know, I always preferred the stuff where they went to like the Crusades or the French Revolution, that sort of thing.
yeah,
But, you know, part of the thing is also it kind of took off rather quickly, and my understanding is they didn't have a whole lot of scripts already written, so they were just kind of, you know, let's fill this in, do what we
Yeah.
can until we can come up with something decent.
Well, and that's interesting. Like, if maybe they wrote the next serial with the Daleks, like maybe off the cuff, that would be interesting, since the Daleks are one of the most like iconic sci-fi creatures ever. So, all right, I got a few notes on here that we can talk about a little bit.
All right?
The Doctor. It's definitely a different and interesting portrayal from the two Doctors that I'm used to. I knew that Hartnell sort of played it more serious. He's a more stern Doctor, and the two Doctors I've seen, Eccleston and Tennant, I mean, they have their serious moments, but they're goofs. They're really goofs. But there were some scenes when, like in the beginning, when the Doctor was trying to just get rid of was Ian?
Yeah.
Ian and Barbara. He was just trying to get rid of them, and that was a very playful side to him that I could still see the Doctor that I've been following in there. So
Again, I think that's part of the fact that I don't think anybody ever did any kind of deep backstory on this. You know, again, my understanding is this. They started production like in March, and it went on in November, so there wasn't a whole time. When Roddenberry did Star Trek, though, he had this entire thing
Right.
laid out in his mind. He knew where he wanted to go with it, and so his characters were at least more developed, even though they were somewhat stereotypical.
Right.
I think they just jumped into Doctor Who and said, hey, you know,
yeah,
do what you can.
let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Well, it's also interesting because he somewhat hinted at the fact that he's an alien.
Yeah.
Because he said, well, I'm from a different civilization, and so is my granddaughter. I'm wondering, is his granddaughter full alien? I don't know why. Maybe I kind of assumed she was part human, but maybe not. Maybe she's a full, whatever his species are called. I haven't said it yet in New Who.
He's from a planet, if I recall correctly, called Gallifrey.
All right,
So he's Gallifreyan.
Gallifreyan.
But they didn't bring that up. I mean, I don't remember that at all during the first season. No, that's entirely possible,
Right.
and my memory is very bad. But I mean, the thing is, you just jumped right into the middle of this, and everybody
Right.
was going, okay, what do we do next?
Yeah. And also, obviously, we see that he is a time traveler because he goes back in time, but vague reference that he's an alien. Not even a reference that he's a Time Lord. It's like, he's an old dude that can time travel in this weird police box thing. Which kind of brings me to my next point. The box. I knew that the TARDIS had I think it's called the chameleon circuit, which would allow it to change. Like if they went to Rome, it would become like a column or something. So, and it's good for blending in, but it got stuck on a police box, and the Doctor just liked it so much that he never fixed it. But it's interesting that in the very first episode, they he realizes it's stuck and it's broken, but it's never brought up again. And I'm wondering, do they ever reference again that it got stuck? Is he like, oh yeah, the chameleon circuit got stuck, fix it later? He just never does.
Yeah, as far as I know, they never did. And again, I did some research on this. They fully intended to, for example, if they went to Rome, to make it look like a Roman column and everything.
Right.
But they didn't have the budget for it. So
Right.
they had a call box, and they said, hey, let's just stick with that and explain that, the
Yeah.
circuit broke.
There's only so many different things they could do on this show with a budget of a ham sandwich. So it's like, we already have the box. Let's just stick with the box for now. It's interesting. It's different.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And when it lands back in the 20th century, nobody would give it a second thought because it fits right in there.
Yeah, and I like, like, obviously it could be a problem when they go to the past. You know, if they go to more ancient times or even here with the cavemen, you drop a police box there, they're going to notice. But I like that even in, I think it was in Series 1, I think it was in Episode 11, when it was they were back in the present, and they just dropped the TARDIS on just like on top of something. I think it was the Rift in Episode 11. And someone was like, well, wait, police boxes, we don't have those anymore. Isn't someone going to notice? And the doctor says, look, if someone is walking by and they see a bright blue police box in the middle of Cardiff, what are they going to do? They're going to walk right by it. And I thought, yeah, I would walk right by it. I'm not going to mess with that. It's someone's blue box. I don't want to mess with their stuff. So that's interesting that just this small little thing, it's like, well, we don't have the budget, so we'll just keep it as a box. And it's like, and it's just stuck through for over 50 years, and they just don't change it. They have the budget to change it now, and they just don't. It's like, no, it's iconic.
Yeah, it's too much of a tradition.
Yeah. The next thing I have written down is the cavemen. Boy, they love to hear themselves talk. Like, these are the most chatty cavemen I've ever seen in fiction. Like, I don't know, and maybe maybe I'm being too harsh, and I get maybe you gotta fill out some time in this, but I don't know, I almost feel like we needed a bit more with the Doctor and the companions, and less on the cavemen, and I felt like they argued about everything. Like, when they went back in and saw that the old woman was dead, I was kind of thinking to myself, well, yeah, she died while you guys were talking. You gotta get on with it. So, that was an interesting choice, to have them just keep talking.
Yeah, now, the cavemen, this is something that was very big in the early 60s. We were starting to see films with Ray Harryhausen special effects. They got 1 million BC with Raquel Welch as a cave woman. Valley of the Gwangi was during this time. So the cavemen were a thing, but yeah, you're right. They were way more talkative there.
Yeah.
It wasn't until probably the late 70s, early 80s that they did this film called Clan of the Cave Bear, where literally the entire film, there's not more than about 50 different, sounds, not even words.
Yeah.
And that's a more realistic portrayal of that time period. We just assumed that people back then had the same kind of logic and reason that we have now, and
Yeah.
that's why they talk so much.
Is that a good movie?
Which one?
The one where they only have like 50 sounds.
Oh, here's the deal.
It didn't sound like fun.
It is very realistic. I mean, if you wanted to show that in a history class where you were doing that, you'd have to do it in college because there's some pretty R-rated stuff in it.
Right.
But it is, it's extremely realistic. But yeah, it's not that entertaining because there's not that much of a story.
Right. Okay, and the last thing I wrote down was the companions. Well, first, it's interesting. It's interesting, like, when Susan would also help out with the TARDIS, and like at the beginning, she was like doing some stuff on the consoles, because I've gone through 2 series where, we've had pretty much one companion. We've had Rose with the Doctor, and she never learned a thing about the TARDIS. The most she could do is open a thing and absorb the time vortex. That was it. And I swear, there were plot points where it's like the Doctor gets trapped somewhere, and it would be so easy if we could just fly the TARDIS in to go save him, but no one learns how to drive this thing except for the Doctor. So that was already interesting with Susan knowing how to use the TARDIS, and then it's interesting that this seems to just be like a running thing now. And granted, I've only seen two times when companions join the Doctor, but it seems to be the thing that when the Doctor gets a new companion, he just sort of takes them to like very drastic points in history. Like here, they go back, to the Ice Age so long ago, and at the beginning of New Doctor Who, the Doctor takes Rose to when the sun expands and destroys the Earth. It's like the first mission is just really, really hard on the companion. Like, we go to the most foreign, weird place we can go, either with cavemen in the Ice Age, or we go to the future, we see a bunch of freaky-looking aliens. So, that's interesting. And, yeah, and the two companions, Ian and Barbara, I don't know, they're interesting.
I think one of the things that some people might not catch about them, though, is the fact that they are extremely well educated. They're both teachers.
Yeah.
And they're educated in science and math and history. So
yeah,
when something goes wrong, they're going to know the history of what happened and how it can be corrected, or they're going to know, for example, they know how to create the fire by using the friction method.
Right.
I still don't understand why they didn't use the flint.
It was right there.
It was right there.
You could have
It's
just
so
used
obvious.
this. Yeah. So yeah, that is rather convenient that they're so useful to this that honestly the Doctor didn't do that much in these episodes, which I thought was interesting, because it's kind of been the Doctor always figures out something to do, and when like Rose would have to save the day, well, it's rare that she has to save the day, whereas here the Doctor really took a back seat to Ian and Barbara.
I suspect they were trying to show that he wasn't used to working with anybody other than his granddaughter.
That's true. It does make me wonder, like, because now, from here onward in Doctor Who, he pretty much always has companions. It's interesting, like, what was his history before all this? Because this is before, even like in New Doctor Who with the Time War and his huge hatred of like the Daleks and the Cybermen and stuff. Like, I wonder, has he even encountered them yet at this point when Doctor Who starts? I don't know. I think I saw somewhere that the Daleks, like their first meeting between the Daleks and the Doctor is in the next serial. So it's like we get to see the origin of this huge bitter hatred between the two of them. So yeah, and because there's still going to be a lot of history. I don't know, because pretty much where I'm at right now at the end of Series 2 of Doctor Who, the Doctor is about 900 years old. So, 900 years old, and technically we're on the 10th regeneration that we've seen, at least. So I'm wondering, has the last 60 years of his life, he just keeps screwing up that he keeps regenerating? Because, I don't know, because I don't think in Doctor Who they ever specifically number his regenerations. That's just sort of a way to keep track of them as a fan. But if this is his first form, I don't know. I guess you just have to look up a bunch of lore of what happened before this, the 800 or so years. Unless we're to assume that between companions, like 100 years passes or something, and he just doesn't get a new companion.
Well, one of the things right there is that, they were obviously in the Stone Age for several days.
Yeah.
But again, how much time would have passed had he taken them back to England? We don't know where they're going in this second one, but it's one of those things that relativity. They could be in the past only for a couple of days, but it could have been years or no time at all when they got back. So,
well, and you'd think it would be such a simple thing of they go back to like right after they left, so no time has passed. But from what I found, the Doctor never gets the date right. Like, I think early on that was a plot point that the Doctor and Rose landed back in London, and he was like, "Well, it's 12 hours later." And then he starts looking around the TARDIS, and then he goes to Rose and is like, it's been 12 months. Sorry about that. It's like, I don't know. It's interesting. That's pretty much all the notes I have. You got anything else to say?
There is one other, and this is completely round the bend. When I got back to the United States, there was another animated series, and you saw the new movie that they made of it just a couple of years ago called Mr. Peabody.
Oh, yeah.
And Sherman with the Wayback Machine.
Right.
And I highly recommend that if you have never watched Rocky and Bullwinkle and Mr. Peabody and Sherman and the Wayback Machine and all those characters. Incredibly funny stuff. It's basically just the flip side of all of this. This was very serious, very
Yeah.
You know, we got to go back and save time and this. But in Rocky and Bullwinkle, it was all completely tongue in cheek, but highly enjoyable.
All right. Sounds good. Okay. Well, if that's basically it, then that's basically it for this video. So, I'm Alex, and that's Dad from 7th Hour Films. See you guys next time. Alright guys, I just wanted to make this quick little thing at the end here. I forgot to mention in this video that the next episode of Classic Doctor Who Reactions will not be going up next week. You're probably already aware, but new Doctor Who Reactions will return next week with Series 3, Episode 1. And the next time I do a Classic Who reaction should be sometime around December. And we'll get into Season 1, Episode 2, The Daleks. So that's pretty much it. End cards are on screen now, I guess. Thank you all for watching once again. Down here should be the Classic Who playlist. Over here is probably the normal Doctor Who playlist and something else that you can watch, I don't know. And the subscribe button if you haven't done that already. You can also follow me on social media, links below in the description. Thanks for watching.